So, yeah, my understanding, the question about that was posed to us is, what is your understanding of the impacts of waste reduction and materials recycling on our uses of economy, environmental protection, and health equity? So my understanding goes back over the course of my life, living in this community, seeing kind of asking those questions as a young kid to my parents and to the adults, and they're like, well, what happens when we're done with it? Well, we throw it away. Where does it go when we throw it away? It goes to the landfill. Oh, where's the landfill? What happens then? Well, it just sits there, and over thousands of years, maybe it integrates, maybe it doesn't. But then so many questions, right? And now we know about all of the problems that we're having with plastics, including with PFAS chemicals, and I'm sure more coming up, more types of chemicals that we're going to have to deal with in the long term with plastics, from all of that throwaway culture that we created. You know, one thing that I could say a lot of things about this in terms of where we're at, and I think that both of my colleagues did a really good job of summing up in different ways, kind of a big picture systems look at where we're at and how things kind of come together and are interconnected. But one thing I just want to talk about a little bit is the very real impact that here in Minnesota that we faced from potential copper, nickel mine proposals that have been brought forward in our state and that would deeply affect everything in our community, our health, our water, our economy, everything. I think that is a great example, right? Because we have the proponents of these projects now coming to the legislature, coming out to the public and saying, well, we need these materials to produce more things that the public is demanding, that consumers around the world are demanding. And some of those products are things that are part of the transition to a clean energy economy. So, what are we going to do? I guess we got to tear up the watershed and run in Minnesota so that we can get at those metals and minerals so that we can make these things. When in fact, if you look at the numbers, if you look at what we're proposing to pull out of the earth of Minnesota, many of those materials we have in abundance already in the earth, whether that is already in the global chain or things that can be recycled or reused, in particular coppers that can be reused in the amount of damage that would have to be done here in Minnesota to get that copper, to extract it from the earth, just to add this little bit onto the world market chain. We're seeing that right here, right? So that's just one example in one little micro place where here we see all of these things potentially put in peril. All for that, like, just never-ending desire to consume more and more and more, and then we're done, we throw it away. So, yeah, we are in this junction right now. Right? We're at this place where we have to say, there's a different way to do this. There is a better way to do this. We cannot any longer just walk off this cliff of the climate crisis, walk off this cliff of destroying our water in the middle of the continent of North America, all for this insatiable sense of more and more and more and more. There has to be a better way, there is a better way. So when I think about this question that's been posed to us, I think about it in those large terms, but also in how it's affecting us right here in our community.
Last year, we passed a historic legislation to accelerate the transition to clean electricity across Minnesota, namely the 100% carbon-free by 2040 standard. Here. We cannot leave foreign working class communities behind. Low-income this time, that's where I was going to ask you. What do you see as the role of the legislature this year in supporting and accelerating clean energy projects in Northeast Minnesota and advancing energy equity in our communities?
Love the question. And I love the segue from Senator McEwen's question into this one. I forgot to say that in my opening, I woke up this morning, I put up my statement in coming here, because I know that creating these systems are clear, creating systems that work for people and planet and future generations coming behind us is going to require a lot of compassion, as well as that we're not embodying that's a balance, right? That's this concept that nobody needs more before everybody else gets what they need. And so I think about this question is how I actually got really politicized. Was around line 3 and around these racialized climate catastrophes that kept plaguing my community and our people growing up in Park, West End, what we called it. I didn't know that we were a coastal community that lived on Lake Superior and St. Louis River. Even though we have streams and rivers flowing under us, I didn't know that when I look around my community that has, I can't believe I'm going to say it, but it's like the progress community, and I don't have any relatives that are in the past. And that's one of the that almost was like 90% of the group is environmental. So when I'm reading along, and I was just okay, America, I'm traveling here, that when I was doing my Master's of Business Administration and really focused on sales, Enbridge Energy was actually one of our big customers. And Line 3 was coming through, and I watched it divide my tribal community, I watched it divide our community here in Duluth, literally dividing family members who, I had cousins, brothers who were making $14 an hour, if having a job at all, refilling beverages and refilling the beer machines at the bar so they could go and make $30 plus an hour defending as security the Line 3 project. And we all know now that we said the aquifers are going to be breached, that this is going to create more missing, murdered Indigenous relatives and all these things that did come to fruition that we've been hollering around for years. And so there's a lot of different things, and I know this room has lots of different solutions that, whether it's corporate capture and really looking at CEOs, agriculture leaders who are leading our state agencies, and who are they accountable for, who are they building power with and for, isn't our communities. I also think about cumulative impacts bills. So what can we do on the front end to make sure that the agencies and the stage that's set is set so that it's people and not profit, planet in the mix too. This year I was really proud to carry a water protection bill that kind of slid under the radar actually. At first it was the Line 3 bill, but we really talked about it comprehensively around the aquifer breach with DNR, that with farmers who were pulling more and more water out of the aquifer and targeting the bad actors who they were pulling just like millions of gallons, and the fine was like a Big Mac and a thing of fries. So we talked about in the way that this isn't just small potatoes, like they're actually causing a public health issue to communities that had their aquifers breached, and then that can cause a lot of different vulnerabilities and diseases for folks if that's breached in the way that we saw with the Line 3. And we're seeing those same industry leaders who are then working at our agencies, right, and then not being accountable and driving big ag and whatnot. So those are some of the things that, we're going to be driving those bills. I think we need to continue to build the power of our coalitions at the Capitol with the legislators, with a lot of big forces of industries, and really talking about this just transition originally came out of labor, racial and economic justice, and so making sure that that's continuing. But we also have to look at how do we give the power back to the community, because when you're a community and you're told to go through the process, like go submit the comments, right? Write letters to your legislators, write to the agencies, and then they come back and we find out that not only were people, you and me and everyday folks, but tribal nations, sovereign nations had their comments hidden. Something needs to be shaken up and something needs to be done, and climate doesn't matter if you're left, right, or independent, right? If we want a livable planet, we really got to come back. Like, I know there was the Citizen Advisory Board that would put more power and voice back to community that was blocked last year in the House. That was one of the most devastating experiences for me as a first-time legislator. I think we need to also continue to look to our federal courts, where we have, shout out Nancy Deb Holland at the Department of the Interior, who made those federal protections for things like the boundary waters. And I think that we need to continue to just build this momentum and continue to work with those industries and really reframe the narrative into how do we both create good paying jobs, preserve our planet, right? And also prepare for public health and the dollars that we're going to save if we do this on the front end.
I see the role of our legislature this year in particular as protecting the things that we did last year. This may come as no surprise to this audience, but I do think that there are going to be efforts that are already underway right now to try and undermine the work that we did last year. So try to walk it back, try to add exceptions or changes that will water things down or make things a little more friendly to the corporate actors who are not necessarily driven by our best interests in terms of clean energy. And to that, I think that sometimes when we talk about these issues, we talk about them in sort of nebulous ways, like it's going to be our job at the legislature to protect. Well, what does that mean? What that means is not succumbing to pressure from corporate actors, from their lobbyists, and from the pressure that they will put on our caucuses, on our political leadership, the money pressure that they will bring to bear on our political leadership and on individuals at the legislature, because they will. I promise you they will. So I do believe that is probably our hardest task that lies ahead, is to push through corporate power that resists the good work that we want to do to hold those actors accountable to the public, to hold our agencies accountable to the public. And, you know, I think before I joined the legislature, I had sort of a broad idea of what that looks like or what it means, that sort of intense corporate lobbying, or, you know, you imagine there's lobbyists. These are people who are paid to do advocacy work at the Capitol. And a lobbyist is a very important job. There are excellent lobbyists at the Capitol who are experts in their field or in the areas where they work, and they're just so valuable in getting good legislation passed. But there are a disproportionate number of lobbyists who are paid, understandably, because this is where the money is, who are paid to advocate for these corporate actors. And so there is much more advocacy at the Capitol for certain positions than others, right? It's much harder for this group to be heard on whichever issue you're bringing to the Capitol, whether it's clean water, cumulative impacts, air quality, holding our agencies responsible, any number of issues. It is a little bit harder for you to get the impact of what you're trying to say and the issues that you hold dear really heard by all of the people at the Capitol, just because of resources, just because of money, and those corporate actors have the resources to flood the legislature with meetings, with phone calls, with people literally in the hallways coming to us to demand things of us. So I do think that it's important for us to talk about these issues with you because we experienced it a number of times this last session. Especially, it was one of the first times I really experienced it because of being in the majority and being a part of conference committees where we were hashing out differences of bills between the House and the Senate and really getting down to the nitty-gritty of what the final bills were going to look like. It was at that point where we saw a lot of that lobbying from corporate interests, whether that was through PFAS or other issues. One issue we saw people come down lobbying from our community against the cumulative impacts bill. And you should know that. You know, there are people here in our community who very strongly put big time pressure on us to not have Duluth included in the cumulative impacts. And it really is, you know, a testament. In particular, our Representative Kozlowski here was tremendously strong in holding the line on that. Yeah, it was huge. But it would have, the easier thing in those situations, just like in any conflict that you've had in your life, right? The easiest thing when you're in a conflict with somebody or something is to sort of say, yeah, okay, I don't need to push this. I don't need to go. I don't need to keep doing it. It's actually quite challenging. Maybe more challenging than you think when you're not in the situation. If you've ever been on like a jury and you've disagreed with the people on the jury, it's kind of like that. There's a tremendous amount of pressure from colleagues, from lobbyists, from people at the Capitol to do a certain thing or to not do a certain thing. And to go against that grain is a real challenge. So I tell you that because there are times when your contact, you're coming down to the Capitol to meet with us, you're sending us those letters, you're calling us, you're showing up. It matters so much. It really, really matters. I remember around the cumulative impacts debates in particular, reaching out to environmental leadership here in Duluth and receiving their support was just so, so helpful to me. And so all of the work that you do in your organizing here in the community matters, and I just wanted to let you know that the Capitol really does matter.
And I will say that playing defense is spot on with Senator McEwen said. I mean, we'll have the opportunity to continue to advance on the issue we're discussing now. But I would say, I mean, even right now in 2013 is when the legislature, you know, created our solar laws. It's 2013, you think that's done, right? Yeah. We're implementing, we're doing it. No, right now, Excel is petitioning the PUC to renegotiate the 25-year solar community guard, or the local community guard. You know what I mean? Not the solar gardens, but there's a different term for this one. But they're trying to renegotiate those 25-year contracts, which is going to cost our public entities millions of dollars. And so the fight doesn't happen, you know, just passing the law. It's implementation. It is holding strong with the agencies, which we're going to talk about. It is watching court challenges. It is watching the PUC. You know, so again, 2013, you'd think, you know, we're 10 years later that we wouldn't be still having this discussion around what we put into law 10 years ago, but we are. And so I think that'll be important, and I assume groups here are tracking that and will be watching and will be weighing in. I know as legislators we will be in contact with the PUC about this as well. So I think Senator McEwen is spot on about this is, you know, playing defense, not within just the hall of the legislature, but throughout all of these ways and all of these places that these corporations try to get out of what we put into law this year, in particular, because we did, as was mentioned, because of the team here, the cumulative impacts, you know, and a variety of things that are going to continue to be pushed on, to be changed, to be exempted, to be challenged in court. It's going to come in a variety of ways this year, so I think that's important, and we still need to play offense too, and make sure that we're continuing to work on this. And I know in the House in particular, the Speaker Portman has, you know, prioritized, this has been a passion of hers around solar in particular, and so I would imagine we'll continue to have some movement on that this session as well, but again, cannot stress the defense enough as well.
All right, so we have one more question, and a reminder, if you actually have already started to write your questions even during this time, so I can start teeing them up. You can hold them up like this, and then Brett and Jenna can navigate those, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So this one is also about agency accountability. And here's a little preamble. Our public agencies no longer work for the public, and instead they defer to and often collaborate with polluting industries. Polluters are violating our laws and hurting our environment and Minnesotans. We've already heard a lot about those examples, but from your perspective, what is your perspective on the legislator's role in making sure that our state agencies fulfill their mission to protect the public, and what are some legislative solutions to ensure accountability? And I'll start with you, Senator McEwen.
Yeah, sure. I turned it off. No worries.
Okay, everybody can hear me. I really appreciate this question very much. I also have observed that some of the things that were asked as part of this question are in fact true, in that there is a lot of sense of collaboration between the agencies that we have set up to protect the environment, to protect the public. Maybe it's important for us to understand something that goes back to the discussion around the first question that we had, which is that our laws in Minnesota and these agencies in Minnesota, many of them were set up at a time when a sort of manifest destiny attitude toward our natural world was still very prevalent. So the DNR, for example, is charged not just with overseeing permitting for some mines, but they're actually charged to promote mining. So they have both duties. They have to promote the development of our natural resources. That is part of what they are charged with doing. But they are also charged with doing that responsibly, right? And then we have also our Environmental Protection Agency, and a lot of the sort of culture is similar, even in our Environmental Protection Agency. And I would state that I want everybody to know, as sort of a baseline matter, that there are many excellent public servants at both the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and our DNR agency. Wonderful people doing their absolute best to do really good work on behalf of all of the people of our state and our environment. So we can all take some comfort in knowing that those people are there and they are doing the best that they can under the direction that they're being given. But that said, even those very good people are having to work within a system that does get politicized, that does find itself influenced by industry to a great extent. So we do see an attitude of collaboration that, and I'll give one example. We did a tour this past year. Legislators were invited for a northern Minnesota mining tour. So we could come for a couple of days. We toured around, we learned about mining, which if you grow up here in Duluth, you kind of learn that no matter what. But we learned about both iron and taconite mining, and then we also took a day and we went to Talon Metals and learned a little bit about some of their proposed mining operation. And we also talked with DNR and NPCA officials who were part of that tour, and some of their things that they discuss, things that they take into account during permitting. And one thing that I absolutely observed, again, well-intentioned people, but a real sense of when there's a permit application, almost a sense of, how do we get you to the place where we sign off and pass this permit, right? It's a sort of like the agency that holds the corporation's hand as they move through the process and tells them the things that they would need to do to get that permit to be successful with the permit. That's not always a bad idea, right? That's actually, in some instances, that can be a very good approach. Sometimes our government bureaucracies can be very confusing for people, for individuals, for businesses, and having professionals who are there to help guide a person or an entity through that is not necessarily a bad thing. But I think what we run into trouble with is when that person who is helping guide that entity through the process is also the person and the group that is going to be making the decision about whether that project even happens at all and whether it is a good idea at all, right? To make that weighing decision. Is this good? Is this going to be good for the people of our state? Even with all of these ideas for better environmental protection, is this still just something that is just too dangerous to do? We don't see that decision really being made. So there is a lot of, I think, misunderstanding. Those agencies, I think the people of Minnesota would assume that we have these agencies and they're looking out for us. You know, we hear from some proponents in industry that we have the strongest environmental protections, you know, and I would say that in the work that I have done and in speaking to people working in this area, that is not, in fact, the consensus, and that in some instances, actually, Minnesota has very weak laws when it comes to certain types of industry, or we have laws that could be interpreted as being strong if they were enforced that way, but there's a lot of leeway. So whoever is making that final call or that decision at the agency has so much leeway that if they're getting that political pressure, if that political piece is coming in, they can make the decision to make something go through, even if it's really, really a bad idea for the people or for the environment. So I am very interested in this, in holding our agencies accountable. I think taking away some, looking at our statutes and perhaps looking at places where there shouldn't be this discretionary piece is a good idea. I have a bill, I think it was originally Representative Schultz's bill back in the day, to separate those duties of the DNR, to place the economic promotion of mining with the Department of, with DEED, with our economic development agency, and then have the DNR just do the natural resources piece and not the economic promotion. But I'm really, at this point, looking for more ideas. So I know many of you work in this space. If you have some kind of interesting ideas that my office is taking ideas, send them our way. Shoot us an email about things that you'd like to specifically see to sort of strengthen up our environmental permitting laws and our environmental protection laws, and we'll take a look at those.
We could just say ditto to Jen. I think that was a great answer. I think we're right at our time too, 6:50, so perfect.
All right. All right, excellent questions. And if you haven't yet, again, the question cards are back there. Feel free to grab one. And obviously, Brett and Jenna can float around here and give them. And we'll see which ones we can get to here. So this one is about EVs to start us off with. And thank you all so much for amazing responses already. Let's just give a huge round of applause. All right, so even with a large increase in electric vehicles, the U.S. would need a 20% reduction in per capita vehicle miles traveled by 2030 to meet climate targets and reduce pressure on battery supply chains, quoting from RMI. How can we make sure Minnesota will direct money from the bipartisan infrastructure law away from any highway expansions and new roads into investments and cycling and transit and walking to reach that vehicle per miles traveled reduction in need?
Really excited about this one because I talked to some folks on the climate team who shared a lot more about the vehicle miles per traveled. So we know in Minnesota that gas emissions are some of the top, 25% of the total emissions are from our vehicles. And we know that electrification isn't enough to get us to our climate goals. Even if we electrified everything, we're gonna have gas-powered vehicles, appliances, all of these things, right, for the foreseeable future. And we also know that folks who are making that transition to electric vehicles. Now, we get lots of emails, I know I do, from Duluth saying there's not enough infrastructure to charge, especially not fast charging, and that's echoed across the state. I got the chance to serve on the bonding committee this year, the capital investment, and we took 5 tours across the state, and that is lacking. It's great that some of the tribal nations are bringing those infrastructure on. We were able to fund that in the last bonding bill. But the really cool thing is that, so Minnesota has a goal to reduce the vehicles mile traveled by 20% by 2050. And if we do that, that's actually a $91 billion saving in health costs, as well as creating more safety and vehicle operation cost reduction. So one of the bills that also kind of didn't quite get its moment in the sun as other bills, but with MnDOT taking a play out of Colorado, what they did was they actually set a requirement for MnDOT to reduce the vehicle's mile travel to meet that 20% reduction goal. So for example, if they want to create a new highway or extend the highway by adding a lane, which we know doesn't actually work, because if you looked at any of the transit studies, when you've added a lane, within 2 to 3 years, the volume continues. So demand is just continuing to grow, and that doesn't actually mean anything. But what the state laws that we passed this year said that if MnDOT gets off of that track and they don't reduce the vehicles per mile, they need to offset it. And so that means that they need to make investments into our bike infrastructure, into active transportation, and other things to make sure that whether you're biking, walking, or rolling around on wheels or whatever, that you're able to have that active transportation. So I think the other thing is that we were able to get really historic investments in active transportation, and that means that we're able to really look at our land use and how we're developing housing. I know that's one of the bills that I'll be carrying this year. It's kind of an A to a B. One part of it is to make sure that we're having housing density, that we have a guaranteed right to housing built by transportation, so that we can reduce those miles, right? Because if you live near your grocery store or your school, that's better for your health. You don't have to have a vehicle. We know in Duluth, over in Raposa's district, 20% of people in my neighborhood, we didn't grow up with a car. We know that there's a gas vehicle cost analysis that I ran today for somebody who lives in the 55803 district. And if you had a vehicle in my district, like for me, example, the average cost is about $11,000 per year. So we know that that's already something that people can't afford, that exorbitant cost. So we need to also look at how we're designing our cities, and that's through land use, through things like making sure that MnDOT is accountable to not expanding, but actually reducing. We know that the 15-minute city actually works very well, and so there's a lot of the nuances and the details that we can get you the information on, but that's a really exciting bill and a tool that we're going to be able to really tackle carbon emissions, but also just make our lives so much more livable and enjoyable, and being able to connect more.
Yeah, so well said. And the only thing that I really would add is that I think if you're not familiar, we have 2 transportation chairs right now who are really wonderful. Senator Scott Dibble, my colleague in the Senate, and Representative Frank Hornstein in the House. And they just passed a historic transportation bill that was, I mean, I've been on the Transportation Committee now since I started, and the first 2 years I was on a Transportation Committee controlled by the Republican caucus, and I can hardly the difference between just the bills that we heard, the discussion that we had in committee, and then the final omnibus bill, it truly was a landmark generational type of transportation bill, both like unlocking also like federal matching dollars, providing money for the Northern Lights Express, record amounts of money for transit, and for really promoting all better forms of transportation than just chaining us to these cars. And it is interesting, as I've been on the transportation committee longer and heard more testimony and really thought about these issues in more depth, it really has come into relief for me just how trapped we are by our car infrastructure. And man, it drives me nuts now when from the freeway that divides our downtown to the fact that I gotta get in the car and I gotta drive almost a total of 6 hours total every time I have to go to the Capitol and then return home, or just that I have to get in the car, to your point, to just go to the grocery store. And those are things that we can improve through this planning, through housing decisions, through zoning decisions, through the allocations. And I take a lot of comfort that we have these chairs in particular, because I know that they also hold those values very deeply and are really trying to create some fundamental change in that area.
Excellent. And so speaking of that, this is another opportunity, I guess, just building on kind of the transition in our transportation system. The Senate is supposedly introducing a bill tomorrow to eliminate parking mandates for new construction in Minnesota. What are your thoughts and feelings about this proposal and what we can do as constituents to help it pass?
Well, that's the housing bill I was mentioning about. I don't know if that's Senator report or if that's tied in there, but part of the bill, at least that I'm bringing, and we've seen across places like Minneapolis, I think even the Duluth City Council recently talked about parking minimums, and there's restrictions when you're developing. We already know that it's very expensive to build homes, whether it's single family or it's multi-unit family housing, runs the gamut. We are about 100,000 units short, and so everything that we can do to reduce those barriers and reduce costs, and also just follow the data that says that parking minimums aren't actually great, and they hinder development. So part of the bill that I'll bring forward is that it's a guaranteed right to build affordable housing in commercial districts. We're also looking at expanding that to industrial districts and across the state, and it would do things like get rid of parking minimums. So if you have a new housing construction project, they couldn't say you have to have, in order to build this housing development, you need to have 20 parking spots or those types of things. We see that in businesses as well, and it goes back to how we design cities and communities that are car-centric versus people-centric. And on some other things that are really great in looking at kind of the wonky, I came from the city of Duluth before I came into this work, so I love the planning world. So it's a little bit more on the wonky zoning side, but it'll also do things like setting a statewide requirement that would actually, if you're building housing that's affordable, it would preserve and mandate through deed restrictions that this housing must be locked in as affordable. We're talking like 60% AMI, those types of things, to really get at more deeply affordable housing. It would also, on the clean energy side of things, there's another part to that bill that actually would say incentivize, if you're going to build a duplex, build a triplex, or add on an accessory dwelling unit. And even better, if you make it energy efficient, there's bonuses and incentives as well. So there's just a lot that we can do when we really think, innovate at the speed of need, and we break through some of those barriers around zoning, things like creating our cities that are people-centric. So anybody else want to add on to that at all?
Oh, yeah, real quick.
Such great bills that oh, so good. I was just to the point of what are some ideas to help get these bills passed. I thought of this earlier too with a question that we had, and I just wanted to say it real quick, is that we do, especially this session, need you to reach out to legislators on all of these good policy pieces. Like the best defense is a good offense, right? Like let's move this good policy forward. Let's really try to get some good stuff across the finish line and let people know that not only are we not going to budge on the good stuff that we passed last year, but we are moving forward and we're going to keep passing even better stuff and build on what we just did last year. So, but in order to do that, right now there is definitely at the Capitol a mood of, okay, we just did a ton of stuff, And there are some members of the legislature who feel a little bit squirrely about that. And I think they're just a little bit scared. I think they're a little scared of blowback that they'll get from perceived, a sense of like, oh, you guys did all this stuff. Is it too much? Is it a little scary? Is it, oh no. So we're gonna need people like you to reach out to legislators, to reassure them, to give them the confidence to say, what you did last year was fantastic. We want you to keep going. So please pass XYZ, whatever bill it is or bills that you're trying to advocate for. But our colleagues are, not us necessarily, I think we're all on board to move these things forward, but some of our colleagues in the legislature are a little bit nervous about the building on what we did. So the more positive pressure you can put on them to say, yes, this is exactly what we want you to do. The kind of thing you did last year, we want you to go even further, do these things. That'd be helpful.
Just one clarifying question. Senator McEwen, we hear the inspiration in that. The question from the crowd, even if they're not our legislators,
Yes.
or if they are our legislators?
I will just say it is more impactful, especially for people that are on the fence, to hear from their constituents. That is who they are going to listen to. So use your principles of organizing. Who can you list that is a friend, family member, if you're part of the Unitarian congregation, a faith community? Who can you tap into that is in their district? That is going to have far more of an impact than you writing, because to be honest, staff will probably filter your emails out. If you are part of an organization that has statewide reach, that's different, right? If the Sierra Club sends an email with a position, but use, honestly, jot down on a piece of paper, find who the target is that you're trying to reach, and that has more of an impact than if you reach it out from out of district. And I guarantee you, everyone in this room knows somebody in one of those districts, and you just need to call that aunt, uncle, coworker, college bestie, and tell them to write that email, and you can help draft it or help that phone call. And when you go to do your visits, when you all come down, that would be awesome. You all come down and visit us, talk to us. But if you could convince someone from a different district to meet you at the Capitol, say I'll buy you a cup of coffee downstairs in the Rathskeller if you come meet me, and then I'll help you set up that meeting with your legislator. That's going to have far more of an impact than you emailing them.
Excellent, and thank you for that clarification. All right, this is a great question that I'm sure all of you are enthusiastic about. We are having a terrible time getting our gas utility comfort systems to even consider alternatives to fossil fuels. We need a clean heat standard to give our effort of policy support. Would you support such a policy?
Yes. Yes, and I thought that we did some legislation around a clean heat fuel working group that set in place to start tackling that too.
I think so too.
Yes, yeah. And I do think, I can't remember specifically what it, but there is some work,
And if that's of interest to you, I know a lot of our environmental coalitions locally here are organizing around the Minnesota Clean Heat Standard, ongoing work, so you can talk to Brett and Jen, and particularly after this tonight. All right, here is next great question, trying to get to all of these here. Minnesota will start the rebate program for e-bikes in 2024 this summer, correct? Yeah, so the question says 25, but it actually starts this summer. These are limited coupons and rebates. We're very excited about them. Approximately $1,400 for the entire state. My wife has epilepsy, is limited in her driving. After each seizure, the state law states she and those who suffer from seizures cannot drive for 3 months. Are there other state programs which would financially support the purchase of an e-bike for her or others in this situation to commute to work, daycare, school, shopping, etc.? Less than 2,000 rebates would be insufficient to support those who need them. That's a very powerful story. Thank you for sharing that.
I would say, we've heard, I think that the program's going to be well utilized, and I think that's a good thing, because then I think it will put demand on the program and we'll need to do more. So blanket kind of big thing there. And I think talking with retailers too and keeping them on board, they're anxious about their rebates coming fast enough, and so the pressure is on us to make sure the Department of Revenue is turning out those, because it's at the point of sale, they have to foot the cost for that. So we want to make sure the Department of Revenue is reimbursing, Twin Port Site early, to make sure they're doing that so they stay very active and engaged with wanting the program. And so again, I think there's potential to grow it. But to that point, I will just say, put in a plug. All of us are available via email, and we have constituent services. So that was a very specific question about resources for someone for that 3-month period with the epilepsy story, which is very powerful. Please email us. Those are exactly the kinds of things that are really specific, that are probably really hard for us on the spot to know an answer to, but we can certainly dig in to figure out what resources there are available in that situation, and maybe even if there needs to be a tweak to the law or something like that as well.
All right, this next one is about investor-owned utilities. Investor-owned utilities like Minnesota Power are primarily motivated to make a profit for their shareholders. What would it take to convert our electric grid to public ownership that would be democratically run with a mandate to expedite development of clean, renewable energy and phase out fossil fuels? What would it take?
I know, yeah, right?
You take it first, crack. I'll clean up.
Okay, you might need to clean up. It would take a huge amount of organizing, and I think I'm very interested in this idea as well. So this is something that I think that I think should be on the table. I have actually told Minnesota Power representatives and Excel representatives that for me, everything is on the table, including public ownership of our utilities, right? So I think having this discussion at all, is, in as much as we can start having that discussion, I think Maine just did something like this, the state of Maine. But it is powerful in and of itself, because we need to let the investor-owned utilities know that we are very serious about our climate goals and actually achieving all of our climate goals, and that we need them to be really good partners with the public in terms of making a responsible transition and doing it in a way that gives agency to the public and to individual consumers of power. So yeah, but the actual achieving of that goal, it would be an enormous achievement that would take a lot of grassroots organizing, a lot of coordination across the state. Nothing is impossible if people start organizing. Maybe that's the direction that people would decide they want to go. But much like the Minnesota Health Plan or single-payer health care, the powerful opposition to something like that is right now, frankly, enormous. It's enormous. So the sort of grassroots movement that has to take place in order to rally the public around an idea like that of big systems change, it just is it's a big organizational lift. I encourage you to go for it.
Excellent. This one is all about the cumulative impacts rule. How can we, as legislative officials yourself, city staff, NGOs, community members, work together to ensure there is a community-based cumulative impacts rule-making process?
Sure, I'll take a crack at that one. Cumulative impacts, if you're not as familiar with it, was a bill that came and passed at the legislature. Actually, I'm the vice chair of the Minnesota Policy Caucus, people call it an Indigenous Caucus, and this was our primary health, equity, climate justice bill that we were championing, led by our chair of Bondi. So big shout out to him and to the many coalitions, and I know so many of you in this room that worked to get that bill over the finish line. And as we were talking about agency accountability, I whispered over to my comrades here and I said, and rulemaking is the mystery box that the bills go into once they're passed, that then goes through this process where the powers that be and influences And also community, you know, can work to weaken or strip or delay. And so I think this is where we've seen with cumulative impacts that takes into account anytime that a business is going to pull an air permit, it takes into account the past, present, and future cumulative, so air, water, land, pollution that, as we know, impacts so disproportionately Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, poor folks, working class folks, lots of folks with disabilities, and in the process for making sure that it's the most community-centered and community-led, there are a lot of cracks from industry in the rulemaking process that is set forth now. It's underway. I don't know exactly which step it's at, so maybe if you two know the details, but I know that we've had 2 open houses, one here in Duluth, and then one was on Zoom. I think they also did one in the cities that was very underattended. And that was an opportunity for community to get familiar with the bill, to understand what the rulemaking process even is, whether it is looking at what's the community benefits agreement gonna look like. We're the first state that's passed this, or one of the first states, so this would be the first time in Minnesota, where if a permit holder, you know, pulls a permit and then they find that there's going to be pollution, for example, what is then the community gonna say if the permit isn't denied outright? What do we want as a community to say, you must do this in order for us to say yes to you being in our community? And it's an open wide book right now. That's actually what's being spelled out in the rulemaking process. So I would say that going to the MPCA and getting plugged in, and we can also make sure to follow up and get this information out. And I know so many of you in the coalition have been so great having like a pre-community meeting before the cumulative impacts meeting, but let's get you plugged into the rulemaking, because it's really important to hear from our local community, especially those from environmental justice impacted, as well as folks like our city councilors, you know, reaching out to your city councilors, reaching out to the local administration, to our county officials and leaders, telling them that this is what we want and what we need and what we frankly deserve. Because our communities for far too long have been paying the health costs, economic costs, but also the cost of our lives. And what we're standing up here with the cumulative impacts to say is not over our dead or our alive bodies, right? Like that's the level of it. And so let's get you connected. We can walk you through. It can be really confusing and cumbersome to go through the public comment process, to write a letter, to engage with it. And so there's so many coalitions who can work you through how to make sure that your voice is heard, whether it's showing up, talking to the agencies and directly at a meeting, or sending in your comments at this point.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Reverend Kozlowski. All right, we have time for 3 last questions. This one is about the Chevron doctrine, which is threatened to be overturned by the Supreme Court this spring. Are you concerned, or have you had conversations in the legislature about the ramifications for what that might do for our state side, for Minnesota law, in being able to work effectively to protect citizen rights from corporate aggression, in particular, if that is overturned?
It's really important.
I mean, Chevron's been involved in lots of nefarious things, so I'm not sure what the Chevron doctrine does.
Just ability to allow a lot of agency interpretation for the agency to have leeway rather than having everything stipulated in the original bill that was passed from Congress. So if you want to talk more, this gentleman has a question afterwards, but for the sake of time.
It's really to stymie federal agencies and I think state agencies from being able to enforce rules that are not passed by the legislature.
It's a good conversation, so feel free to follow up with this afterwards. For the sake of time, I'll keep the train moving along
But
here.
it has real ramifications for state agencies' ability
Yes.
to make rules about environmental protection.
Yep, so let's stay tuned on that.
Okay, I'll take a note and check in with her.
Yeah, duly noted. For the last 2 questions here, this one is basically from Sierra Club and the American Association for University of Women. Gender equity is, of course, an integral aspect of climate justice. How hopeful should we be that the ERA will become part of the Minnesota Constitution? Great question.
I think, I know that there's a push to move things forward this year, but honestly, I've been working on a number of other issues and I haven't been following the latest with the ERA push, but I did hear, I had been an author, co-author of one of the bills in the past, and I did hear that there was a movement here afoot this session to try to move things forward again. So, yeah, it seems like a no-brainer, something that we should have passed a long time ago.
Yeah, and I'll just tag on that. I know that the ERA is starting off strong on the first day. You're going to have the rally at the Capitol, so come on down to the Capitol on February 12th. One of the big things last year that with the ERA, you know, we've seen historic attacks on obviously gender equity across so many fronts. We have seen hundreds and hundreds of anti-trans legislation moving across the country and attacks on our reproductive freedom and gender freedoms, right? And so that was one of the things that I just have to say as a trans non-binary person that I'm really grateful that the ERA kind of pulled back and they said, we're not just going to make sure that we're fighting for human rights that should just be the standard for women, but that we're going to actually expand the table, because in Minnesota, that's what we do when our neighbors are struggling. We reach out, we help bring them hot dish, right? We get out there, we should be shoveling each other's sidewalks and driveways and taking care of each other. And it's the same concept with the ERA. And so they actually expanded the coalition this year, bringing on folks like Out Front Minnesota, that's really leading on trans and queer issues. They've also been engaging with Indigenous folks because Two-Spirit aspect is very specific when you factor in women, trans, gender, trans, and Two-Spirit identities. And so I'm really proud of the work that they're doing in building. And I know one of the things that they really need all of us to get behind is that the push that I heard today from the Minnesota Queer Caucus that I'm also a member of is they're coming back full steam with the ERA, that is going to be going forward with the hope that it would pass this year and then go on the ballot in 2026. But to do that, it needs to be well funded. We're going to have to get out there, knock and talk and walk with our neighbors, because that's going to go to a constitutional amendment. That means it's on the ballot, and that means that all the work that we have to engage and bring our neighbors and our relatives along in the voting process is going to be really critical. So just encourage anybody who feels very strongly, and I hope it's all of us, that you tap in and get connected with that coalition. It's going to take every single one of us to make sure that it doesn't just get passed this year and then get on the ballot, but that it passes on the Minnesota ballot in 2026 then.
I love it. Sign us up to walk the block and talk on that. Very excited about that initiative for the ballot update too. I hadn't heard that. Thank you. All right, so we are at time. I know I'm actually after this going to pass it back to Jenna to wrap us up here tonight, but especially given all three of you work very closely with the city of Duluth too, our final question tonight that we'll have time for is just reflecting on, with the change of administration and the climate issue now obviously being less of a priority, at least on the campaign trail for Mayor Reiner, what would you recommend in us as advocates to do to engage the city? This person says we can't have 4 years of doing nothing. Amen to that.
Sure, I could say, we work with who the people send us, and so we will work with the administration we have, because that's what the voters did. And I would say, we also have autonomy as state legislative delegation, right? To continue to work and push on what our constituents tell us and what they are asking us to work on. It's great when we're all in deep partnership and a deep team on, pairing what's happening at the city with what's happening at the legislature. But we also we're able to go and we're going to do as much good in what we believe the city needs and what we believe our constituents are telling us, and that doesn't change with whoever's mayor. And so we're going to go down and keep fighting for what our constituents and our voters have told us in our elections and on the doors and in our conversations. And we'll continue to move forward on those issues, and we'll continue to push the city to come if there's a change in perspective on the issues that was mentioned by Brett. We're still going to hold our ground in what we continue to work on and what we continue to push for.
That was so well said. I agree completely. I was just going to add that at the inaugural for the mayor the other day, I noted that the mayor had said that they were putting together their more detailed agenda and vision for the city. At that time, he didn't detail it. He sort of, talked in general tones about our city. But it sounded like they were putting together their plans, like right now as we speak. So speaking of contacting your local officials, now is a great time for you to send that email to him, to his administration, to our to your city councilors, just to reiterate the importance of these issues for you as a Duluthian.
Yes, and when you're writing that, definitely remind them of the amazing work of the Sustainability Department led by Sustainability Director Mindy Graham, and all of the grant money.
And I was just going to put a plug in exactly as a former city employee myself. There's tremendous city staff, we've had 150 here, who are embedded sustainability across, housing to transportation, to treating the opioid and addictions that are facing us. The climate is not a single issue, and we don't experience the struggle as any single issue. And just also a shout out to Rep. Olson, who's the original GOAT, our OG, in the Minnesota Values Plan. That's where I really see us as, it's great if we can be rowing in the same canoe and rowing in the same direction, right? But the Minnesota Values Plan survey is out now, and it's a great chance for you to be able to tell us what is it that you want us to be working on, and that also can help to inform and shape and influence what's happening across all of our levels of government. And as we've seen a big shakeup, I'm new, I'm here, I'm learning, and I've said my 4 R's: respect, responsibility, reciprocity, and relationship. And that's how we're going to interact with anybody. I think it's also an opportunity to build and strengthen and kind of bridge across divides and continue to talk about climate and to talk about this racial reckoning and economic justice, and bringing that narrative and bringing our actions forward. And that doesn't end at any door of a factory or end at any doorstep of City Hall. That's still our people's house, the same as the Capitol is a people's house. And so let's go, bring it. This is the year to referendum and find out, I think, and we've shown that. So let's keep going.
This is the year, and as Jenna comes up to share a big upcoming events announcement, please join me, get on your feet, give a big round of applause to Representative Olson, Representative Kozlowski, and Senator Cruz for being here tonight. Thank you all.
We're going to keep clapping. Thank you so much, Brett, for facilitating. Thank you again to Brett Pence with MNIPL for helping to put this all together. Thank you, co-hosting. I'm going to leave us tonight with just a couple of announcements. There are some upcoming lobby days that might be of interest to this particular group. On February 14th, our Friends of the Boundary Waters is hosting a day for clean water, and on March 12th, the Rise and Repair Coalition, which is all about climate justice, everything we talked about tonight, and I know many organizations will be trying to rally everyone in Duluth to join us down at the Capitol for those. It is also Transit Equity Day this week, and Zeitgeist is doing a phenomenal job in hosting conversations about mobility and economic justice, and a lot has to do with climate and being connected in our communities. And they're putting on some really phenomenal events this week and next, so I invite you to check those out. And lastly, on a personal note, I wanted to give a shout out to all of the folks who are at City Hall tonight. I know that there has been some good community organizing, and I know folks turned out tonight urging our local decision makers to respond to the urge for a ceasefire in Gaza. So wanted to note that in this space. And we will be following up with three of you with many questions, a lot of good resources for specific bills and issues that were brought forth this evening, and we will all be in touch throughout the legislative session and onward. And yes, please get in touch with your legislators. They're such great people to work with, and we really, yes.